I looked my Aunt Bernice dead in the eye across the Thanksgiving turkey and said thank you for the old Toyota you sent me. It barely runs, but I appreciate the gesture. The clinking of silverware stopped instantly. My aunt slowly lowered her wine glass to the table. She looked at me with genuine confusion and asked, "What Toyota are you talking about, Monique?" "I sent you a brand new Mercedes-Benz GLE with white pearl paint." My sister Chantel, sitting next to me, spit her red wine all over the white tablecloth. My brother-in-law Kyle dropped his fork onto his plate with a loud clang. Before I tell you how I discovered that my own sister stole an $85,000 car meant for me and left me with a death trap that almost took my life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the one person in your family who always gets the short end of the stick. I am Monique, 32 years old, and for years I let my family treat me like a doormat. But that Thanksgiving was the day everything changed. It started an hour before dinner. I was driving the 2005 Toyota Corolla my sister claimed she had generously found for me. The heater was broken and the Atlanta rain was freezing against the windshield. The engine sounded like a dying animal coughing and sputtering as I turned into the driveway of my sister's sprawling estate in Buckhead. I prayed the car would just make it up the hill, but my prayers went unanswered. Right as I reached the massive iron gates, the engine gave one final violent shake and died. Black smoke started pouring out from under the hood, billowing up into the gray sky like a signal fire of my poverty. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I could feel the heat of shame rising up my neck. I looked up at the balcony of the mansion. The French doors opened and my brother-in-law Kyle stepped out. He was holding a glass of scotch in one hand and his phone in the other. He did not come down to help. He did not call a mechanic. Instead, he held his phone up and started recording. I could see the ring light reflecting in his glasses. Even from down the driveway, I could hear his voice carrying over the wind. "Look at this, folks. There goes the property value of the neighborhood. This is what happens when you let the lower tax bracket into a gated community." He laughed that hollow, condescending laugh of his and turned the camera back to himself. I took a deep breath, grabbed my cheap bottle of wine from the passenger seat, and stepped out into the rain. The smoke from my car was choking me, but the humiliation from Kyle's Instagram story hurt far worse. I buttoned my coat tight and walked up the long paved driveway. My boots were old, and the sole of the left one was coming loose, letting the cold water seep into my socks. I just wanted to get inside, get warm, and survive this dinner for the sake of my Aunt Bernice, who was flying in from Miami. I finally reached the massive double oak front doors and reached for the handle. Suddenly, the door flew open, but it was not to welcome me. My sister Chantel stood there blocking the entrance like a bouncer at an exclusive club. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She looked down at my feet and wrinkled her nose in disgust. "Stop right there, Monique," she snapped, holding up a manicured hand. "Do not you dare step on my imported marble floors with those shoes. Look at them. They are covered in oil and grease from that piece of junk you drive." I tried to protest. I told her it was raining and I was freezing. I told her I had wiped my feet on the mat. But Chantel did not care. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper, so the guests inside would not hear. "We have important investors here tonight, Monique. Kyle is trying to close a deal. We cannot have you tracking mud and grease through the foyer looking like the help. Go around the back. Use the service entrance through the kitchen. That is where you fit in better anyway." She slammed the door in my face before I could say another word. I stood there staring at the heavy wood shivering in the cold. I could hear laughter coming from inside. Warmth and light were just inches away, but I was locked out. Again. I tightened my grip on the wine bottle and started walking through the wet grass around the side of the house. My heels sank into the mud with every step. I could see through the floor-to-ceiling windows into the living room. Kyle's friends were all there holding crystal glasses, laughing at something Kyle was showing them on his phone. Probably the video of my car smoking in the driveway. I felt a tear, hot and angry, slide down my cheek. They thought I was weak. They thought I would just take the disrespect forever because I was the quiet one. The poor one. The one who should be grateful for scraps. But as I trudged through the mud toward the back door, I made a silent vow to myself. This would be the last time I walked through the service entrance. They did not know it yet, but the woman walking into their kitchen was not the same woman who drove up in that broken car. The war had just begun. The heat hit me instantly as I stepped through the service entrance into the kitchen. It smelled of sage brown sugar and roasted turkey, a sharp contrast to the smell of burnt oil and exhaust that clung to my damp coat. I spent a solid 5 minutes scrubbing the mud off my boots with paper towels before I dared to step onto the hardwood. I could hear the party buzzing in the living room, a symphony of crystal glasses clinking and performative laughter. I took a deep breath, smoothed down my dress, which suddenly felt very cheap, and walked down the hallway toward the noise. The living room looked like a page out of Architectural Digest, but void of any actual soul. Everything was white and gold. The 12-foot Christmas tree in the corner was draped in crystals that probably cost more than my rent. Standing in the center of the room, holding court like a queen, was Chantel. She was surrounded by a group of women who all looked identical with their blowout hair and Botoxed foreheads. Chantel was holding up a bright orange handbag, parading it around for everyone to touch. "Oh, this old thing," she laughed, tossing her hair back. "Kyle just surprised me with it. He said a successful man needs a wife who looks the part. It is a Birkin. There is a 2-year waiting list, but you know Kyle, he pulls strings." I stayed in the shadows of the doorway watching. My eyes narrowed as I focused on the bag. As a senior insurance underwriter, I spend my days assessing the value of high-end assets. I know exactly what authentic luxury looks like, and I know what a fraud looks like. The stitching on the handle was just a fraction of a millimeter off. The gold hardware was too shiny. It was a fake, a very good fake, but a fake nonetheless. Or worse, it was real but bought with money that did not belong to them. I filed that information away for later. Suddenly Kyle spotted me. He was standing by the fireplace with 2 older white men in navy suits sipping scotch. His eyes scanned over my wet hair and old dress with a look of amusement. He waved me over not like a family member but like he was summoning a waiter. "Gentlemen, come here." He boomed, his voice loud enough to silence the nearby conversations. "I want you to meet the other side of the family. This is Monique, my wife's little sister." I forced a smile and extended my hand to the man on his right. "Hi, I am Monique," I said, my voice steady. Kyle did not let me finish. "She is a sweet girl, really. She helps out with some paper pushing downtown. You know, filing clerical work, data entry. Very boring stuff, but it keeps the lights on, right, Monique?" The men chuckled condescendingly, not bothering to shake my hand. One of them looked at me with pity. "Good for you, dear. Every office needs good support staff." My jaw tightened so hard I thought my teeth might crack. Paper pushing, support staff. I am a senior risk assessor for one of the largest firms in the country. I authorize multi-million-dollar policies. I deny claims for fraud every day. I make more in a month than Kyle makes in a quarter selling overpriced condos. But looking at their smug faces, I realized correcting them was pointless. To them, I would always be small. So I just knotted my nails, digging into my palms. "Right," I said softly. "Just keeping the lights on." Kyle clapped me on the shoulder a little too hard. "Why do not you go find the kids, Monique? I think they spilled juice in the den. You are good at cleaning up messes, aren't you?" He turned his back on me, dismissing me completely to continue talking about his golf handicap. I stood there for a second longer, staring at the back of his expensive suit jacket. He was right about one thing. I was very good at cleaning up messes, and he was about to become my biggest project yet. Dinner was finally announced, and the dining room smelled like heaven. There was cornbread dressing, candied yams, collard greens, and a massive golden turkey that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. For a second, I let my guard down. I was hungry and tired, and I just wanted to sit down and eat a warm meal with my family. I walked toward the long mahogany dining table where the crystal glasses were sparkling under the chandelier. There was one empty high-back chair right next to Uncle Ray, and I began to pull it out, ready to finally rest my feet. Suddenly, a hand clamped down on my wrist. I froze and looked up into Chantel's face. She was smiling that tight, fake smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, honey, no," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness loud enough for everyone to hear. "That seat is not for you. That is for Mr. Henderson. Kyle is hoping to bring him on as a partner for the new development deal." I looked around the table. Everyone was staring. Mr. Henderson, a heavy-set man in a gray suit, looked down at his plate, embarrassed. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks again. "But there are 12 seats, Chantel," I whispered, trying to keep my dignity intact. "Surely there is room for your sister." Chantel laughed, a light tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Monique, you are so funny. This table is for the adults who need to discuss serious business. You would just be bored with all the financial talk. Besides, we ran out of the good china." She pointed a manicured finger toward the far corner of the room near the drafty window. There, set up hastily against the wall, was a small, wobbly plastic folding table. It was covered with a cartoon tablecloth and surrounded by 3 noisy toddlers. "You can sit there with the kids," she said, patting my cheek. "It is better suited for you anyway. You can help little Marcus cut his turkey. He is messy, just like his auntie." Kyle let out a snort of laughter from the head of the table. "Yeah, go sit at the kiddie table, Monique. Maybe you will learn something from them. They probably have a better credit score than you do right now." The guest chuckled politely, not wanting to offend their host. I felt like I had been slapped. I looked at the heavy mahogany chair one last time, then turned and walked the long walk of shame across the room. I could feel their eyes on my back. I sat down on a cold metal folding chair that screeched against the floor. While the adults at the main table were served on gold-rimmed porcelain plates, Chantel walked over and dropped a soggy paper plate in front of me. "Here you go," she said. "Try not to spill anything on the carpet." I sat there surrounded by screaming children, watching my family feast like royalty. I cut my dry turkey with a plastic fork that snapped in half. I watched Kyle raise a glass of expensive wine, proposing a toast to success and family. He looked so proud, so untouchable. He had no idea that the woman eating off a paper plate in the corner was the only reason he had a roof over his head. I chewed my food slowly, swallowing the humiliation along with the yams. Let them laugh, I thought. Let them enjoy the main table for now. Because when I'm done with them, they will be lucky if they can afford a plastic table like this one. The atmosphere in the dining room shifted the moment headlights swept across the bay window. The heavy thrum of a powerful engine silenced the room. Everyone turned to look as a sleek black town car pulled up to the front steps. It was not an Uber, and it certainly was not a rental. It was the kind of vehicle that demanded respect before the passenger even stepped out. Kyle immediately stopped mid-sentence, dropping his glass of wine on the table in his haste to stand up. Chantel smoothed her dress so aggressively I thought she might tear the fabric. The transformation was instantaneous. The arrogant sneers they had worn while banishing me to the kids' table vanished, replaced by masks of humble adoration. The front door opened and Aunt Bernice walked in. She brought the cold air with her along with the scent of expensive Chanel perfume. At 65, she looked better than most women half her age. She was wearing a floor-length cashmere coat and carrying a cane that I suspected was more for fashion than function, given how forcefully she strode into the foyer. She did not look like a guest. She looked like the owner of the building coming to inspect her investment. Auntie Bernice Chantel squealed, her voice pitching up 2 octaves. She rushed forward with her arms wide open. "We are so happy you made it. The flight was okay, I hope." Kyle was right behind her, practically bowing. "Here, let me take your coat, Bernice. You look magnificent, truly stunning. Can I get you a scotch? I have the 20-year-old reserve you like." I watched from my plastic chair in the corner as they fawned over her. It was nauseating. Just minutes ago they were mocking my poverty, and now they were bowing to the source of their own wealth. Aunt Bernice allowed Chantel to kiss her cheek and let Kyle take her coat, but her eyes were scanning the room. She was not looking at the crystal chandelier or the fake Hermes bag. She was looking for me. "Where is my niece?" she demanded, cutting through Kyle's rambling about his latest real estate deal. Her eyes landed on me in the corner, squeezed between a high chair and the drafty window. Her perfectly arched eyebrows furrowed slightly, but she did not comment on the seating arrangement yet. She walked past the main table, ignoring the important business partners Kyle had been bragging about, and came straight to me. I stood up, wiping my hands on a napkin, feeling suddenly very small in my old dress. "Monique, baby," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like safety and old money. "It is so good to see you. You look tired, child. Are you working too hard?" "I am okay, Auntie," I stammered, trying to hold back tears. "Just busy." She pulled back and held me by the shoulders, looking me dead in the eye. "Well, at least the commute should be better now, right?" "How is she running?" I blinked, confused. "How is who running?" "The car, baby, the car. The Mercedes GLE. I know you wanted black, but I picked the pearl white because I thought it suited you better. Does it drive smooth?" I paid extra for the air suspension package because I know those roads near your office are terrible. My brain short-circuited. Pearl white, Mercedes GLE, air suspension. I thought about the rusted gray Toyota sitting in the driveway with the black smoke and the broken heater. I opened my mouth to say, "Auntie, I do not know what you are talking about," but before I could get a sound out, Chantel was there. She appeared out of nowhere, sliding her arm through Aunt Bernice's. "Oh, Auntie, come on. Now let us not talk about cars on an empty stomach. You must be starving. The turkey is getting cold, and we have that special cranberry sauce you love." She shot me a look over Bernice's shoulder. It was a look of pure panic and malice. A look that said, "Keep your mouth shut or else." "Yes," Bernice Kyle chimed in loud and nervous. "Let us eat. Monique is still getting used to the features. You know how high-tech things are these days." "Right, Monique." They steered her away from me like bodyguards protecting a VIP. I stood there by the plastic table, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Mercedes. She sent a Mercedes." I looked down at my phone where I had a picture of the Toyota. Slowly, the pieces started to click into place, and the realization made me cold all over. They did not just treat me like trash. They stole a fortune from me and handed me a death trap in exchange. The dining room was filled with the soft clinking of silverware against fine china and the low murmur of self-congratulatory conversation. I had spent the last hour pushing dry turkey around my paper plate, listening to Kyle brag about his non-existent real estate empire, and watching Chantel pretend to be the perfect hostess. My patience had worn thin, but my resolve was hardening like concrete. I looked at the time. It was now or never. I stood up from my wobbly plastic chair in the corner. The metal legs scraped against the hardwood floor, creating a screech that silenced the room instantly. Every head turned. Kyle looked annoyed, his fork halfway to his mouth. Chantel's eyes widened with a silent warning, but I ignored them both. I picked up my plastic cup filled with lukewarm tap water and walked toward the main table. I stopped right next to Aunt Bernice, who was dabbing the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin. "Auntie," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension, "I just wanted to say thank you." Bernice looked up at me, a warm smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. "Oh, baby, you do not have to thank me for coming. I would not miss Thanksgiving with my favorite niece." "No, Auntie." I continued, keeping my eyes locked on hers, but peripherally watching Chantel. "I mean, thank you for the car. I know it is a 2005 Toyota, and the heater does not work, and it smells like wet dog, but I really appreciate you thinking of me. It gets me from point A to point B most of the time." The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. Chantel stopped breathing. Kyle froze. Aunt Bernice frowned, her smile fading into confusion. She set her crystal wine glass down slowly. Then she picked up her knife and fork and dropped them onto her plate with a loud, deliberate clatter that echoed like a gunshot. She turned her entire body toward me, her expression shifting from confusion to something much sharper, something dangerous. Toyota. She repeated the word like it was a foreign language. Monique, what are you talking about? I looked innocent. The Toyota Corolla auntie. The one Chantel said you helped her find for me. She said it was all you could afford right now, but that it was a gift from the heart. Bernice stood up. She was not a tall woman, but in that moment she looked 10 feet tall. She slammed her hand down on the table, making the gravy boat jump. Toyota, she roared, her voice shaking the chandelier. I did not send you a Toyota. I wired your sister $85,000 cash 3 weeks ago. I told her to take you to the dealership and buy the pearl white Mercedes-Benz GLE 2024 with the AMG package. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Chantel, who had been sipping her red wine, choked violently, spraying crimson liquid all over the pristine white tablecloth. It looked like a crime scene. Kyle dropped his fork onto his plate, the metal clanging loudly. The investors looked back and forth between us, their eyes wide. Bernice ignored them all. Her eyes were laser-focused on Chantel, who was currently coughing and gasping for air. Chantel, Bernice said, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. Where is my money, and where is your sister's car? I took a sip of my water and sat back down on the edge of the mahogany table, crossing my legs. Finally, I had a seat at the main table. The silence that followed my question was heavy enough to crush bones, but it was broken a split second later by a sound that gave me more satisfaction than any paycheck I have ever earned. It was the wet, violent sound of Chantel choking. She had been in the middle of a smug sip of her expensive Cabernet when the words $85,000 hit her ears. Her throat closed up in panic, and she sprayed a fine mist of dark red wine all over the table. But the worst of it landed on her chest. Her cream silk dress, the one she had practically forbidden me from breathing on, was now soaked in a jagged crimson stain that looked exactly like a crime scene. Kyle was no better. His composure shattered instantly. He had a forkful of candied yams halfway to his mouth, but his hand went limp with shock. The silver fork clattered onto his fine china plate with a deafening noise, and a glob of sticky orange yams slid off the edge of the table, landing right on his polished Italian leather loafers. For the first time all night, the power dynamic in the room shifted. They were not the kings and queens of the castle anymore. They were scared children caught with their hands in the cookie jar. Chantel was gasping for air, patting her chest frantically, while a waiter rushed over with a towel. She waved him away, her eyes darting wildly between me and Aunt Bernice. "Oh, Auntie," she wheezed, her voice trembling and high-pitched. "You ruined the surprise. I mean, it is not what you think. The dealership called last week. You know how the supply chain is. The chip shortage. Yes, the chips. They said the Mercedes is delayed until after Christmas." She was lying through her teeth, and she was doing a terrible job of it. Even the investors at the table looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and checking their watches. You do not buy a $500 junk car with no heater as a placeholder for a luxury SUV. You get a dealer loaner. But she kept babbling, trying to fill the silence with noise. "I bought the Toyota just so Monique could get around in the meantime," she stammered, her face flushing a deep, blotchy red. "It is a temporary solution. Just a little helper car until the big gift arrives." "Right, Kyle. Tell her, Kyle." Kyle nodded his head so fast, I thought it might snap off. "Right. Exactly. Supply chain issues are terrible right now, Bernice. Big problems globally. Very hard to get inventory." Aunt Bernice did not say a word for a long, agonizing minute. She looked at the wine stains spreading on Chantel's dress, then she looked at the sweat beading on Kyle's forehead. She was a businesswoman who built a logistics empire from nothing. She knew the smell of fear, and she knew the sound of a lie. But she also came from a generation that believed in keeping family business private, especially in front of guests. She slowly picked up her wine glass and took a measured sip, never taking her eyes off Chantel. "Is that so?" she said, her voice cool and unbothered, though her eyes remained hard as flint. "Well, I suppose we will just have to wait and see then. But Chantel, dear, do get that dress cleaned. It looks terrible. She went back to eating her turkey, signaling that the interrogation was over for now. Chantel slumped back in her chair, looking like she had just run a marathon. She thought she had survived. She wiped the sweat from her upper lip and shot me a look of pure venom, but I just smiled and took a bite of my cranberry sauce. She had no idea that Aunt Bernice's silence was not forgiveness. It was simply a stay of execution, and I was going to be the one to flip the switch. Dinner ended with a forced cheerfulness that felt more fragile than the crystal glasses everyone was holding. Aunt Bernice had retreated to the guest suite pleading jet lag, but I knew she was just tired of the lies. The investors shook hands with Kyle, still oblivious to the fact that the man they were doing business with was a fraud. As the front door closed behind the last guest, the mask dropped completely. The warmth of the holiday evaporated, leaving the house cold and silent. I was in the kitchen scraping the leftovers of the expensive meal I was barely allowed to eat into the trash. The plastic tablecloth from the kids' table was balled up in the corner, a pathetic reminder of my place in this hierarchy. I reached for my purse, ready to leave, ready to escape the suffocating air of this mansion. Suddenly, a heavy hand slammed against the granite countertop right next to my head. I jumped, spinning around to find Kyle standing there. The charming host was gone. His tie was loosened, his face was flushed with too much scotch, and his eyes were dark with rage. He loomed over me, trapping me between the counter and the refrigerator. "You listen to me, and you listen good, Monique," he hissed, his breath smelling of stale alcohol. "You keep your mouth shut about that money. You hear me?" I tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. "Kyle, I am just confused," I said, my voice trembling slightly, despite my best efforts. "Aunt Bernice said—" "I do not care what Bernice said," he interrupted, spit flying from his mouth. "That old hag does not understand business. 85,000 is nothing to her, but for me it is seed money. I am turning that into 500,000 by next quarter. Crypto. Real estate. You would not understand because you have a poverty mindset, Monique." He leaned closer, invading my personal space, until I could see the broken capillaries in his eyes. "If you say one single word to her, or anyone else about the car, I will destroy you. I will tell everyone you stole from us. I will ruin that little reputation you have built at your boring insurance job. I will make sure you are cut out of this family forever. You will be on the street." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the aggression. He wasn't a powerful businessman. He was a desperate gambler playing with money that wasn't his. And for the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't scared of him anymore. I was disgusted. "Is that a threat, Kyle?" I asked quietly, gripping my purse strap. "It is a promise," he sneered, poking a finger into my shoulder. "You are lucky we even let you in this house. Do not bite the hand that feeds you. Now get out. Get in that piece of trash car and leave. And pray it starts, because I am not calling a tow truck for you." He stepped back, giving me one last look of contempt before storming out of the kitchen. I stood there for a moment in the silence, my heart pounding not from fear, but from adrenaline. He thought he had silenced me. He thought he had won. He had no idea that he just gave me every reason I needed to burn his world to the ground. I walked out into the cold night, got into my death trap of a car, and turned the key. It sputtered to life, and as I drove away from the mansion, I didn't look back. The war had officially begun. I gripped the steering wheel of the Toyota so hard my knuckles turned white as I navigated the winding roads leading away from my sister's estate. The rain had turned into a torrential downpour, hammering against the roof like 1,000 tiny stones. Inside the car, it was freezing. The heater, which Chantel swore just needed a little warm-up time, was blowing nothing but icy air onto my legs. I could see my own breath fogging up the glass, adding another layer of blindness to the night. I reached out to wipe the condensation away with my sleeve, shivering uncontrollably. It was not just the cold that had me shaking. It was the rage. The image of Kyle's smug face and Chantel's fake concern burned in my mind brighter than the headlights of the oncoming traffic. $85,000. They stole $85,000 and gave me this rust bucket that sounded like a lawnmower choking on gravel. I reached for the windshield wiper stalk and clicked it to the highest setting. Instead of clearing the water, the rubber blade on the driver's side detached halfway, flapping uselessly against the glass with a rhythmic thwacking sound. Thwack, thwack, thwack. It was mocking me. I squinted, trying to see the road through the blur of water and streetlights. I was approaching the sharp curve near the highway on ramp. I took my foot off the accelerator and gently tapped the brake pedal. Nothing happened. The pedal felt spongy soft, like stepping into a bowl of pudding. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pressed harder. Still nothing. The car was not slowing down. The speedometer needle hovered at 45 miles per hour, and the concrete median was rushing toward me. Panic surged through my veins, cold and electric. I slammed my foot down on the brake with all my weight. A grinding noise like metal screaming against metal tore through the cabin, but the wheels did not lock. The car began to hydroplane, sliding sideways across the wet asphalt. I screamed, wrestling with the steering wheel, trying to correct the spin. The headlights swept across the trees, then the guardrail, then the road again in a dizzying blur. For a terrifying second, I thought this was it. I thought I was going to die in a heap of scrap metal on the side of the road while my sister drank vintage wine in her warm mansion. I yanked the emergency brake up with both hands. The rear tires locked up with a screech and the car shuddered violently, spinning a full 180 degrees before slamming to a halt just inches from the concrete barrier. Silence fell over the car, broken only by the sound of the rain and my own ragged breathing. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard where the check engine light flickered ominously. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely unclench them from the wheel. I looked around the interior of the car, the torn upholstery, the water leaking through the sunroof, the brake pedal that was still stuck to the floor. This was not just an old car. This was not just a cheap replacement because of a chip shortage. As I sat there alive by sheer luck, a chilling realization washed over me, colder than the rain outside. A car does not just lose its brakes and wipers all at once. This vehicle was dangerous. It was a death trap. And my family, the people who were supposed to love me, had put me in the driver's seat and sent me out into the storm. They did not just steal from me, they endangered my life. And as I slowly put the car back into gear and limped toward home at 10 miles per hour, I knew that I was done playing the victim. If they wanted a wreck, I would give them one. But it would be their lives crashing and burning, not mine. The fluorescent lights of my corner office hummed with a sterile white noise that usually calmed me. Being a senior underwriter means living in a world of black and white facts. There is no gray area in my line of work. Either the numbers add up or they do not. Either the claim is legitimate or it is fraud. I sat down in my ergonomic chair and took a sip of black coffee, allowing the bitterness to wake up my senses. My family thought I was just a paper pusher. They thought I spent my days filing receipts and answering phones. They had no idea that I had access to the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System and the LexisNexis Risk Management Database. To put it simply, if you own it, owe money on it, or stole it, I can see it. I unlocked my workstation and the dual monitors flickered to life. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a moment, I hesitated. There is a rule in my industry about looking up people you know. It is a gray area, ethically speaking, but after last night I was done with ethics. I was hunting. I opened the main portal for the Georgia Department of Revenue and selected the Vehicle Registration Search tab. I did not have the VIN number yet, but I did not need it. I had something better. I had the arrogance of a man who thinks he is untouchable. I typed in the name. Miller, Kyle. I hit enter. The system took a few seconds to process the request. The spinning circle on the screen matched the churning in my stomach. I prayed that I was wrong. Part of me, the part that was still a little girl wanting her big sister to love her, hoped that the search would come up empty. Maybe the dealer really was waiting on a chip. Maybe the money was just sitting in an escrow account, The screen refreshed and the results populated in a neat grid. My breath hitched in my throat. There were 2 active registrations under his name. The first was his leased BMW. The second was a new entry that made my blood run cold. 2024. Mercedes-Benz GLE 450. Color pearl white. I clicked on the details and the full file opened up. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the data points that dismantled every single lie they had told me. The status was listed as active. The purchase date was August 15th. That was 3 months ago. 3 months. I sat back in my chair, feeling the air leave my lungs. They did not order the car last week. They did not get a call about a chip shortage yesterday. Kyle had bought that car 3 months ago. He had been driving it. He had been parking it in that garage. For 90 days they had looked me in the face, watched me struggle to get to work in my old car, and lied. They had taken Aunt Bernice's $85,000 and cashed it immediately. I looked at the registration address. It was listed at their home address in Buckhead. But then I saw something else. A small red flag icon next to the title status. In the insurance world, red flags are my bread and butter. I clicked on the lien holder tab. If Aunt Bernice sent cash, there should be no lien holder. The title should be clean and clear. But it wasn't. The screen stared back at me with a brutal truth. There was a lien recorded just 2 weeks after the purchase. Lender Quick Cash Title Loans, LLC. Loan amount, $60,000. The room started to spin. Kyle had registered the car in his name, effectively stealing it from me. Then he had turned around and used that stolen car as collateral to take out a high-interest loan from a predatory lender. He had cashed out the equity of a gift meant for me. I wasn't just a victim of theft. I was the victim of a sophisticated financial shell game orchestrated by my own sister and her husband. I printed the document, the sound of the printer rhythmically spitting out the paper like a judge banging a gavel. I picked up the warm sheet of paper and stared at Kyle's name. "You think you are smart, Kyle?" I whispered to the empty office. "But you just left a paper trail right to your prison cell." The registration on my screen was the smoking gun, but I needed to find the bullet. In my line of work, we follow the money because people lie, but bank accounts do not. I opened the credit check portal. As a senior underwriter, I have access to the deep layers of financial history that most people think are private. I typed in Kyle's social security number, which I had memorized from the time I helped them file their taxes 3 years ago. I hit enter and watched the screen load. If his vehicle registration was a lie, his credit report was a horror story. I gasped audibly in the quiet office. The screen was a sea of red ink. Kyle's credit score, which he bragged was perfect, was actually sitting in the low 500s. That is not the score of a successful real estate mogul. That is the score of a man drowning in debt. I scrolled through the transaction history looking for where the money was going. It was not going into property developments or stocks. It was going to DraftKings, BetMGM, offshore poker sites, and a crypto exchange that had crashed months ago. Kyle was not an investor. He was a degenerate gambler. I watched the timeline of his financial collapse. He had maxed out every credit card he owned. He had taken out a second mortgage on the house without Chantel knowing. But the most damning piece of evidence was the entry dated just 2 days after he registered my Mercedes in his name. There it was. A deposit of $60,000 from Quick Cash Title Loans, LLC. I felt bile rise in my throat. I knew exactly what that was. A title loan is the last resort of the desperate. You hand over the clean title of your car to a predatory lender, and they give you cash at an astronomical interest rate. If you miss a single payment, they come in the middle of the night and take the car. Kyle had taken Aunt Bernice's gift, a luxury car meant to keep me safe, and walked straight into a loan shark's office. He used the Mercedes as collateral to get $60,000 of fast cash. I looked at the terms of the loan listed in the database. The interest rate was 189% APR. He was paying thousands of dollars a month just in interest. He had burned through the cash Aunt Bernice sent. Then he leveraged the car itself to feed his gambling addiction. And what did he give me? A $2,000 death trap with no brakes. I sat back in my chair, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and clarity. This was not just theft. This was a Ponzi scheme built on my back. Kyle was terrified. He was bleeding money and the loan sharks were circling. If Aunt Bernice found out he didn't have the car, he would go to jail. If the loan sharks didn't get paid, they would take the car and he would be exposed. He was trapped, and a trapped animal is the most dangerous thing in the world. Suddenly, the broken brakes on my Toyota didn't feel like an accident anymore. They felt like a solution to his problem. If I died in a wreck, he could claim it was a tragedy, collect some kind of insurance payout, and keep the charade going a little longer. My brother-in-law wasn't just a thief. He was mathematically calculating the value of my life against his gambling debts. And according to his ledger, I was worth more dead than alive. The smell of old Joe's garage always reminded me of my grandfather. It was a mix of motor oil, stale coffee, and Newport cigarettes, a scent that meant honesty in a world full of plastic smiles. Joe had been fixing cars in our neighborhood for 40 years. He was the kind of mechanic who would tell you if you needed a new transmission or if you just needed to tighten a screw. I trusted him with my life, which is exactly why I brought the Toyota to him. I pulled the car into the bay, the brakes squealing like a dying pig. Joe wiped his greasy hands on a rag and walked over, shaking his head, before I even turned the engine off. "Monique, baby," he said, his voice gravelly and deep. "Please tell me you did not spend actual money on this heap." I could hear the timing belt screaming from down the street. I stepped out of the car feeling a wave of embarrassment. "It was a gift, Joe. From my sister. But the brakes feel spongy and the dashboard lights are acting funny. The airbag light never comes on even when I start the car. Can you just give it a once-over?" Joe frowned, walking around the vehicle tapping the rusted fender with his knuckle. "A gift, huh? Well, let's see what we are working with." He popped the hood and spent 10 minutes poking around, making non-committal grunting noises. Then he moved to the interior. He sat in the driver's seat and ran his hand over the steering wheel. He squinted at the dashboard, then leaned in closer. "That is strange," he muttered. "The cover on the steering wheel hub is loose, and the passenger side dash looks like it has been glued back together." He reached for his screwdriver. I stood by the open door watching him. My stomach was starting to knot up again. I expected him to tell me I needed new brake pads or an oil change. I did not expect him to start taking the car apart. Joe wedged the screwdriver into the seam of the steering wheel cover and applied pressure. With a loud pop, the plastic casing flew off. Joe did not say anything at first. He just froze. Then he slowly pulled his hands back as if the car had bitten him. "Lord have mercy," he whispered. I leaned in to see what he was looking at. Where the airbag should have been, where the life-saving explosive device folded into a neat square should have sat, there was nothing, just a hollow, empty space. Wait, no. It wasn't empty. Joe reached in and pulled out a handful of crumpled, yellowing paper. It was newspaper. Old sports pages and grocery ads wadded up and stuffed into the steering column to hold the plastic cover in shape. He moved to the passenger side and ripped the dashboard panel open. More newspaper, no airbag. "Monique, look at me," Joe said, and his eyes were wide with genuine fear. "This car has no airbags. None. They have been stripped out, probably to sell on the black market. And look at the sensor wires. They have been cut and taped over so the warning light wouldn't come on." I stared at the ball of newspaper in his grease-stained hand. The headlines were from 5 years ago. "If you had hit that median last night," Joe said, his voice shaking with anger. "If you had crashed this car, your head would have hit this steering wheel at 60 miles per hour. You would be dead, Monique. Stone cold dead. This is not a car. It is a coffin." I leaned against the workbench, my legs giving out. They knew. Kyle knew. You do not buy a car like this without knowing. They stripped the safety features out, or bought it from someone who did, and they did not care. They put me in this machine, sent me out into the rain, and hoped for the worst. It wasn't just negligence. It was a setup. They traded my safety for a few $100 and a Mercedes. And looking at the pile of trash that was supposed to save my life, I realized they did not just want me poor. They would not have minded if I was dead. I stood there in the middle of old Joe's garage, feeling the concrete floor sway beneath my feet. I stared at the wad of yellowed newspaper in Joe's grease-stained hand. It was an ad for a grocery store sale from 5 years ago. That was what was supposed to save my head from smashing into the steering column. That was the value my sister and her husband placed on my life, less than the cost of a Sunday paper. My knees finally gave out and I had to lean against the dirty workbench for support. For the last 24 hours I had been operating under the assumption that Chantel and Kyle were just greedy. I thought they were selfish narcissists who stole my gift because they wanted to look rich. I thought they gave me the Toyota because they were too cheap to rent me a decent car while they spun their lies. But looking at the hollowed-out dashboard, the horrific truth crashed into me with the force of a freight train. This was not just greed, this was something far darker. I replayed the events of the previous night in my head. The rain, the darkness, the way the brakes felt like stepping on a wet sponge. The way the car spun out toward the concrete barrier. If I had been driving just 5 miles per hour faster, or if the road had been just a little slicker, I would have hit that wall. My head would have slammed into the steering wheel. With no airbag to cushion the blow, I would have suffered severe brain damage or a broken neck. I would have been dead before the paramedics even arrived. And what would have happened then? The realization made me vomit a little in my mouth. If I died in a tragic car accident on a rainy Tuesday night, Chantel and Kyle would have been free. Aunt Bernice would have flown in for a funeral, not an investigation. She would have been too grief-stricken to ask about the Mercedes. Chantel would have played the grieving sister crying crocodile tears over my casket while Kyle quietly sold the Mercedes or kept driving it, knowing the only person who knew the truth was 6 feet under. They did not just steal from me, they made a calculation. They weighed the risk of me finding out against the probability of me dying in this death trap, and they decided those were acceptable odds. They rolled the dice with my life. I looked at Joe, who was watching me with a mixture of pity and fear. He knew what I was thinking. He knew that you do not buy a car with a salvage title and missing airbags by accident. You buy it because it is cheap, and you buy it because you do not care what happens to the person driving it. I took a deep breath, forcing the air into my constricted lungs. The tears that had been threatening to fall evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I was done being the victim. I was done being the little sister who needed protection. They wanted a tragedy, well, I would give them one. But it would not be a car crash. It would be a financial and social collision that would leave no survivors. I looked up at Joe, my eyes dry and focused. "Put it back together," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, like it belonged to someone else. He looked at me like I was crazy. "Monique, I cannot let you drive this. It is illegal. It is dangerous. I am not going to drive it," I told him. "I am going to use it. Put the dashboard back. Make it look exactly like it did when I brought it in. I need them to think I am still the stupid, unsuspecting little sister driving her death trap to work. I need them to think they are winning until the exact moment I take everything they have." I stood outside the garage, gripping my phone so tightly I thought the screen might crack under the pressure of my thumb. The wind was whipping around the corner of the building, carrying the scent of rain and motor oil, but I barely felt the cold. Inside that garage was the physical proof that my sister did not care if I lived or died. But right now, I could not scream. I could not cry. I had to become the greatest actress the world had ever seen. I needed access to their house one last time, and the only way to get inside the fortress was to lower the drawbridge myself. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes and visualizing the submissive, quiet little sister I had been for 30 years. The doormat, the scapegoat. I dialed Chantel's number. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was tight-clipped and laced with paranoia. "What is it, Monique? I am busy helping Kyle with paperwork." I I forced my voice to pitch up slightly, adding a tremor of nervous energy that she would interpret as submission. Hey sis, I said, sounding breathless. I am sorry to bother you. I just got off the phone with Aunt Bernice. The silence on the other end was deafening. I could practically hear her heart stop. What did she want? Chantel snapped, her voice dropping to a hiss. What did you tell her, Monique? I bit my lip, tasting blood. Nothing bad, I promised quickly. She was asking about the delivery date again. She wanted to call the dealership herself and yell at the manager. You know how she gets. I paused for dramatic effect, waiting for the panic to set in before delivering the antidote. So I lied for you, Chantel. I told her the dealer called me personally this morning. I told her there is a delay with the custom pearl paint job and that it won't be ready for another 2 weeks. I told her not to worry and that I was happy to wait for perfection. I heard a long, shuddering exhale through the speaker. It was the sound of a woman who had just stepped off the gallows. Oh, Monique, Chantel breathed out, and I could hear the smile returning to her voice. Oh, thank God, you did good. That was very smart. You handled that perfectly. I stared at the rusted hood of the Toyota where the paint was peeling off like dead skin. I just did not want to cause drama, I said, my voice sickeningly sweet. I know how stressed you and Kyle are with the investments. I want to help. Exactly, Chantel said, her tone shifting from fearful to patronizing in a heartbeat. We are doing this for the family, Monique. For all of us. Once this deal with the investors closes, Kyle is going to be swimming in cash. We are going to take care of you. I promise. I will make this up to you. Maybe I will buy you those Louboutins you always stare at in the magazines, or a spa weekend. Just us girls. I felt bile rise in my throat. She was bribing me with shoes while I was looking at a car that was rigged to kill me. That sounds great, sis, I said, staring dead-eyed at the brick wall of the garage. You are the best. You are a good sister, Monique, Chantel purred. Keep Bernice calm. Just 2 more weeks. Okay. Okay. Love you. Love you too, sweetie. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. The naive smile I had plastered on my face vanished instantly, replaced by a look of cold, hard hatred. The transformation was complete. She thought she had bought herself 2 weeks of silence. She thought she had manipulated me into protecting her lies one more time. She had no idea that she just invited the wolf right into her living room. I didn't want her shoes. I didn't want her spa days. I wanted her to feel the exact same terror she felt for those 3 seconds before I told her I lied. But next time, there would be no relief. Next time the trap would snap shut, and I would be the one holding the key. I put the phone in my pocket and walked back into the garage. It was time to go to work. The next morning I pulled into the driveway of the estate, feeling like a Trojan horse wrapped in a wool coat. I had spent the night rehearsing my lines and perfecting my posture. I needed to look defeated. I needed to look like the little sister who had accepted her place at the bottom of the totem pole. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror of the death-trap Toyota. My eyes looked tired, which was not an act, but the smile I plastered on my face was pure fiction. I grabbed a bucket of cleaning supplies I had brought from home because I knew Chantel would not want me using her expensive organic products, and walked to the front door. I did not have to knock. The door was already open, and I could hear Chantel screaming at a delivery driver before I even stepped inside. The house was in chaos. Decorations were being hauled in by a team of workers. White lilies, white drapes, white carpets. It looked less like a Christmas party and more like a blizzard had exploded inside the foyer. Chantel was standing in the center of the madness, holding a clipboard and looking like she was about to have a stroke. When she saw me, she did not say hello. She did not ask how I was. She just pointed at my bucket. "Thank God you are here," she snapped, checking something off her list. "The cleaning crew canceled on me last minute. Can you believe the unprofessionalism? I need you to start in the dining room and scrub the baseboards. And do not miss the corners this time, Monique." I nodded, keeping my head down. "Of course, Chantel. Whatever you need." She paused, tapping her pen against her chin, looking at me with a critical eye. Actually, scratch that. Change of plans. Kyle is hosting a VIP cigar lounge for the investors tonight in his home office. He left it a disaster zone. There are papers everywhere and it smells like an ashtray. Go clean it up. Make it look professional. And do not touch anything on his desk, just organize the piles. My heart skipped a beat. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from smiling. Kyle's office was usually the forbidden zone. It was always locked, always off limits to everyone, especially me. Chantel was so overwhelmed with her party planning that she was making a fatal error. She was sending the investigator directly to the crime scene. "Are you sure?" I asked, adding a tremble of hesitation to my voice. "You know Kyle hates it when I go in there. Just do it, Monique," she yelled, turning back to the florists. "Stop being so difficult. He gave me the key. It is on the hook by the kitchen. Go, now." I walked to the kitchen and grabbed the small brass key. It felt heavy in my hand. Cold. I walked down the long hallway toward the double mahogany doors of the study. The noise of the party prep faded away with every step. I was moving from the chaos into the silence of the hunt. I reached the door and inserted the key. The lock tumbled with a satisfying click. I pushed the door open and slipped inside, closing it softly behind me. The room smelled of expensive leather, stale scotch, and arrogance. I looked around at the mess. Files were scattered on the floor. Empty glasses sat on the bookshelves. It was the room of a man who was unraveling. I set my cleaning bucket down on the Persian rug. I was not here to scrub baseboards. I was here to bury them. I put on a pair of latex gloves not to protect my hands from dirt, but to keep my fingerprints off the evidence I was about to find. I looked at the massive oak desk in the center of the room. It was time to dig. I locked the heavy mahogany doors behind me, and the click of the latch sounded like the starting gun of a race. I was alone in the belly of the beast. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and expensive cologne, masking the scent of desperation. Chantel had sent me in here to organize piles of bills and dust the shelves, but I went straight for the massive oak desk that dominated the room. This was where Kyle played at being a business mogul. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves from my cleaning bucket, not because I was worried about germs, but because I did not want my fingerprints on the crime scene I was about to uncover. I scanned the desk rapidly, past due notices from credit card companies, final warnings from the country club. It was pathetic, really. A paper trail of a life lived far beyond its means. But I was looking for something specific. I crouched down to check the lower cabinets. Behind a stack of unread golf magazines I saw it, a Sentry safe. It was heavy gray and looked impenetrable. My heart sank for a split second. I did not have the combination, but then I remembered who I was dealing with. Kyle was a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else. He was the kind of man who used his birthday as his PIN number. I reached out and tugged on the handle. It turned smoothly in my hand. The door swung open. It wasn't even locked. His arrogance was so profound that he did not think he needed to lock up his secrets in his own house, especially not when the only person cleaning was his stupid little sister-in-law. I reached into the dark metal box. There were no stacks of cash, just two thick manila envelopes. I pulled out the first one. My hands trembled as I slid the contents out. It was the original certificate of title for the 2024 Mercedes-Benz GLE. The paper was cream-colored and thick with an official watermark. And there it was in black and white type. Owner Kyle Miller. He had hidden the original here, probably to keep it away from the loan sharks he had given the duplicate to. I set it aside and picked up the second envelope. It was blue and had the logo of a major life insurance carrier on the front. I frowned. Why would Kyle have insurance papers in the safe? I opened the flap and pulled out the policy. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I had to grab the edge of the desk to keep from falling over. Term life insurance policy. The words swam before my eyes. Insured name Monique. Face amount $1 million. Primary beneficiary Chantel Miller. Relationship sister Effective date, October 31st. I stopped breathing. The date was exactly 3 weeks ago, just days before they gave me the Toyota. They had taken out a secret life insurance policy on me, forging my signature on the application. They paid the premium with the money they stole from Aunt Bernice. I looked from the policy to the car title and then to the window where I could see my rusted Toyota parked in the driveway. The car with no airbags, the car with the cut brake lines. The puzzle pieces slammed together with a sickening clarity. They did not just want me to drive a bad car. They needed me to die in it. If I crashed and died, they would get $1 million tax-free. It would pay off their gambling debts, save their house, and buy them a new life. I sat on the floor of the office holding the paper that put a price tag on my head. I wasn't a sister to them. I wasn't family. I was a lottery ticket. And they were just waiting for my number to come up. I pulled out my phone and began snapping high-resolution photos of every single page. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone. It was replaced by a cold, calculating fury. You wanted a payout, Chantel. You are going to get one, but it won't be from an insurance company. I had just finished snapping the last photo of the insurance policy when I heard the sound that stops every heart. The heavy front door slammed shut downstairs. It echoed through the house like a gunshot. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps on the hardwood. It was not Chantel's clicking heels. It was the heavy thud of Italian leather boots. Kyle, he wasn't supposed to be home. Chantel said he was at the country club until 5. Panic is a funny thing. It makes your brain move at light speed while your body feels like it is moving through molasses. I looked at the safe. It was still open. I looked at the papers in my hand, the original car title and the life insurance policy that put a bounty on my head. I couldn't put them back. If I tried to close the safe now, the metal clang would give me away. I couldn't put them in my cleaning bucket, he might check it. I didn't have pockets in my leggings. The footsteps were getting louder, coming down the hallway toward the office. I did the only thing I could think of. I folded the thick stack of papers in half and shoved them down the front of my dress right inside my bra. The sharp edges of the paper dug into my skin, scratching me, but I didn't care. I grabbed a feather duster from my bucket and spun around just as the door handle turned. Kyle stood in the doorway. He looked disheveled. His tie was loosened and his face was flushed with that dangerous mix of alcohol and stress. He blinked, staring at me standing by his desk. The air in the room instantly became heavy. "What the hell are you doing in here, Monique?" he growled, stepping into the room. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I was terrified he could hear the paper crinkling against my chest. I gripped the feather duster until my knuckles turned white. I forced my posture to slump. I needed to look small. I needed to look like the servant he believed I was. "I am sorry, Kyle," I stammered, backing away from his desk. "Chantel sent me in. She said the investors would be smoking cigars in here tonight. She told me to polish your golf trophies. She said they needed to shine." I held my breath. It was a gamble. I was betting everything on his narcissism. I was betting that his ego was bigger than his suspicion. Kyle stopped. He looked at me. Then he looked at the shelf of cheap participation trophies behind me. His eyes narrowed. For a terrifying second, I thought he was going to ask to search me. I thought he was going to see the sweat beading on my forehead. But then the tension in his shoulders dropped. A smirk slowly crawled across his face. He walked over to the shelf, ignoring me completely, and picked up a small gold trophy. He ran his thumb over the engraving. "Yeah," he said, his voice thick with unearned pride. "Make sure you polish this one good." That was the tournament where I closed the deal with the Henderson Group. Big money. He turned to me, stepping way too close. I could smell the stale scotch on his breath. He looked down at me with a sneer. "Clean them well, Monique. Maybe if you rub some of that success off, it will help you get a real job." He laughed at his own joke and patted me on the shoulder. His hand landed inches away from where the stolen documents were hidden. I flinched, but he didn't notice. He was too busy admiring his reflection in the plastic gold. "Carry on," he said, turning to leave. "And close the door when you are done. I do not want the help wandering around." He walked out. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade into the kitchen before I let out the breath I had been holding. My legs gave out and I sank to the floor, clutching my chest. I could feel the sharp corner of the car title digging into my skin. It hurt, but it was the best pain I had ever felt. He thought I was polishing his legacy. He had no idea I was carrying the weapon that would destroy it. I stood in the driveway next to the open hood of the Toyota and put on the performance of a lifetime. I had disconnected the battery cable just enough to kill the engine, but not enough to look obvious. I turned the key and let the silence hang in the crisp morning air. Then I slammed my hand against the steering wheel in mock frustration and let out a groan loud enough to be heard from the front porch. "Damn it!" I yelled, stepping out of the car and kicking the tire. "Not today. Please, not today." Right on cue, the front door of the mansion opened. Kyle stepped out wearing a tailored navy suit and spinning a key fob around his finger. He looked like the picture of success, or at least the picture of a man pretending to be successful. He stopped at the top of the stairs and looked down at me with a smirk. "Car trouble again, Monique," he called out, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I told you that thing was reliable. Maybe it is operator error." I looked up at him, putting on my best damsel in distress face. "It won't start, Kyle. I think the battery is dead. I cannot be late for work today. We have a big audit coming up. Can you please give me a ride? It is on your way to the club." Kyle sighed, dramatically, checking his Rolex. "I do not know, Monique. I have a very tight schedule. Time is money." "Please, Kyle, I will pay for gas." He chuckled, walking down the steps. "Keep your change, Monique. You need it more than I do. Come on, hop in. But wipe your shoes first. I do not want mud on the mats." He walked past my sad, broken Toyota and clicked the unlock button on the key fob. The lights of the pearl-white Mercedes GLE flashed a welcome. The mirrors unfolded automatically. It was a magnificent machine. My machine. I walked toward it feeling a strange mix of pride and violation. I bought this. My aunt's money paid for every inch of this steel and glass, and yet I had to ask permission to sit in the passenger seat. I opened the door and the smell hit me. It wasn't the smell of pine air fresheners or stale fast food. It was the intoxicating scent of brand new premium leather. I slid into the seat, and it hugged my body perfectly. The dashboard was a spaceship of digital screens and ambient lighting. I ran my hand over the wood grain trim on the center console. It felt cool and smooth. "Nice ride," I said, buckling my seatbelt. "Is this new?" Kyle climbed into the driver's seat and pushed the start button. The engine roared to life with a low, powerful growl. He adjusted the rearview mirror and shot me a smug look. "This," he said, patting the dashboard. "This is a special corporate lease. One of my top clients hooked me up. It is the AMG package. Twin turbo. 400 horsepower. You cannot buy these off the lot right now. You have to be on a list." I nodded, staring out the window to hide the fire in my eyes. A corporate lease. Another lie. He was so comfortable lying it just rolled off his tongue like poetry. "It feels expensive," I said quietly. "It is expensive," he corrected me, merging onto the main road and flooring the gas pedal. The car surged forward, pushing me back into the seat. He drove aggressively, weaving through traffic just to show off the handling. "This car costs more than you make in 3 years, Monique," he said, laughing. "But you know what they say. You have to dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Maybe if you work harder one day, you can afford a C-Class. Used, of course." I looked at his hands gripping the leather steering wheel, my steering wheel. He was lecturing me about hard work while driving a car he stole from me, paid for by a woman he was lying to. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. "Yeah, Kyle," I said, forcing a smile. "Maybe one day." I reached down and subtly adjusted the seat controls. I wanted to remember exactly how this felt. Because the next time I sat in this car, Kyle wouldn't be driving. He wouldn't even be free. He would be in a cell, and I would be driving this beast to visit him, just to rev the engine outside the prison walls. But for now, I just sat back and let the thief act like a king. The Mercedes glided to a smooth stop at the curb outside the coffee shop, where I asked to be dropped off. The engine purred with a quiet power that mocked my pounding heart. This was the moment. The most dangerous gamble I had taken since this entire nightmare began. I unbuckled my seatbelt, and my hands were shaking so bad I had to clasp them together in my lap for a second to steady them. I looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. It was 8:45 in the morning. Kyle would call Chantel the second I was out of the car. He always did. He needed to report back to headquarters to laugh about how pathetic I was, or to coordinate their next move. I was counting on his arrogance. I was counting on the fact that he never looked in the back seat because he treated this car like a rental, not a possession. "Thanks for the ride, Kyle," I said, reaching for the door handle. "I really appreciate it." Yeah, just hurry up," he grunted, checking his hair in the rearview mirror. "I have a meeting in 20 minutes. Do not slam the door." I opened the heavy door and turned to grab my bag. As I did, I let my purse slip from my shoulder. It hit the floor mat with a thud. "Oh, clumsy me," I muttered. I leaned back into the car to grab it. In that split second of orchestrated chaos, I reached into my coat pocket. My phone was already recording. The screen was dim. With a sleight of hand that would have made a magician proud, I slid the device deep into the crevice between the passenger seat and the center console. I pushed it down until it was invisible, but the microphone was facing up. I grabbed my purse and stood up. I slammed the door just a little harder than necessary. Kyle sped off without even looking at me. The tires screeched against the asphalt as he merged aggressively into traffic. I stood on the sidewalk watching my car and my phone disappear around the corner. I felt naked. In the modern world, your phone is your lifeline. It is your connection to everything. And I had just planted mine on the enemy. I walked into the coffee shop and ordered a black coffee that I had no intention of drinking. I sat at a high-top table by the window and stared at the street. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. What if he found it? What if he hit the brakes too hard and the phone slid out? What if it rang? No, I had put it on silent. But what if the battery died? Every minute felt like an hour. I watched the second hand on the wall clock tick by, tick, tick, tick. With every second, I imagined the conversation happening inside that leather cocoon. Was he calling Chantel? Was he calling his bookie? Or was he finding the phone right now? I could picture him reaching down, finding the device, seeing the recording timer ticking away. If he found it, he would know. He would know I wasn't the stupid compliant sister anymore. He would know I was hunting him. He would destroy the phone, and then he would come for me. I gripped the paper cup so hard, the lid popped off, spilling hot coffee on my thumb, but I didn't even flinch. I needed this evidence. I had the documents, but I needed the intent. I needed a jury to hear his voice. I needed them to hear him say it. I needed to hear him admit that he wanted me dead. 20 minutes passed. It was the longest 20 minutes of my life. Finally, I saw the white Mercedes turn the corner. My stomach dropped. This was it. I walked out to the curb just as he pulled up. He rolled down the window. "You forget something?" he asked, looking annoyed. "Yeah," I said, forcing a laugh. "I think my phone slipped out of my pocket. I am such a mess today." I opened the door and reached into the crevice. My fingers brushed against the cold glass of the screen. It was still there. He hadn't found it. I pulled it out and hid the screen against my palm. "Got it," I said, closing the door. Kyle didn't even say goodbye. He just drove off. I looked down at the phone in my hand. The recording was still running. 24 minutes and 12 seconds. I pressed stop and saved the file. My hands were trembling as I pressed play and held the speaker to my ear. And then I heard it. The voice of betrayal, loud and clear. And I smiled. Gotcha. The silence in my apartment that night felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I sat on the edge of my bed with my legs pulled up to my chest, staring at the phone lying on the duvet. It looked innocent enough, just a piece of glass and metal. But I knew that what was trapped inside that device had the power to destroy lives. My hands were trembling as I unlocked the screen. The recording file was 45 minutes long. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, sealing myself off from the world, and pressed play. At first there was just the hum of the road and the low thrum of the Mercedes engine. I scrubbed forward past the part where I got out of the car. I heard the door slam. Then I heard the sound of Kyle turning up the radio. For 10 minutes it was just him, singing off-key to classic rock. My heart started to sink. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he didn't make a call. But then the music volume dropped. I heard the distinct ringtone of his car's Bluetooth system dialing out. 1 ring, 2 rings. "Hey, baby." It was Chantel's voice echoing through the car speakers, clear as a bell. "Did you drop her off?" "Yeah, I dropped her off," Kyle replied, his voice dripping with amusement. "You should have seen her face, Chantel. She was looking at the leather seats like a dog looking at a steak. She actually thanked me. She thanked me for giving her a ride in her own damn car." I heard Chantel laugh on the other end, but it was a nervous, tight sound. Did she suspect anything? Did she ask about the title again? "No," Kyle scoffed. "She is clueless. She swallowed that lie about the chip shortage hook, line, and sinker. Monique doesn't have the spine to question me. She is a follower. Always has been." There was a pause in the recording. I pressed the headphones tighter against my ears, holding my breath. Kyle Chantel's voice dropped lower, losing its humor. "I am worried. What if she takes the Toyota to a mechanic? What if she finds out about the missing airbags? Or what if she just keeps driving it and nothing happens? We cannot keep this charade up forever. The loan sharks are calling me too now. We need that money." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. And then Kyle said the words that killed the last ounce of love I had for my family. "Relax, Chantel. She won't be driving it for long." I made sure of that this morning before she came outside. I crawled under there and nicked the brake line. Just a tiny cut. It will hold for a few miles, maybe a day or two. But once that fluid leaks out and she hits the highway, she's going to lose all braking power. I gasped aloud in my empty apartment, my hand flying to my mouth. But Kyle Chantel sounded panicked now. "What if she doesn't, you know? What if she survives?" "She won't," Kyle said casually, as if he were discussing the weather. "Not at highway speeds in a tin can with no airbags. She will go right through the windshield. And when she does, we collect. The accidental death rider on that insurance policy is double indemnity. That is $500,000, Chantel. That pays off the shark, it pays off the house, and it gets us out of this hole. We just have to wait for the phone to ring." I ripped the headphones off my head and threw them across the room. I scrambled backward on the bed until my back hit the wall. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt too thin. They weren't just waiting for an accident. They engineered one. Kyle had crawled under my car with a knife. He had calculated the physics of my death. And Chantel, my own sister, her only concern was what would happen if I survived. I sat there in the dark, shivering uncontrollably. The tears finally came, but they were not tears of sadness. They were hot, angry tears. I looked at the phone recording still paused on the screen. That audio file was my shield and my sword. They wanted a funeral. They were planning to spend the money from my death. Well, I was going to make sure the only thing that died was their freedom. I wiped my face and picked up the phone again. I saved the file to the cloud, then to my laptop, then to a flash drive. I was going to make them pay, and the price would be much higher than $500,000. I sat in the darkness of my apartment, with the glow of my laptop screen illuminating my face. The audio file of my brother-in-law confessing to his crime was safely stored on 3 different hard drives. Most people would have called 911 immediately. Most people would have wanted the police to rush in with sirens blaring to arrest the man who cut their brake lines. But I did not just want Kyle arrested. I wanted him obliterated. I wanted to strip him of his pride, his reputation, and his false status before I let the law take his freedom. I picked up the phone and dialed the number listed on the bottom of the predatory loan contract I had photographed in his office. A voice answered on the second ring. It was rough and impatient, the voice of a man who spends his nights chasing deadbeats. Quick cash recovery. Speak. I didn't hesitate. My voice was steady, cold, and sharp as a scalpel. I am calling with information regarding a delinquent account. The name is Kyle Miller. The asset is a 2024 pearl white Mercedes-Benz GLE. I heard the man on the other end stop typing. He let out a low, humorless chuckle. Miller. Yeah, we know him. We have been looking for that car for 3 weeks. He keeps it garaged behind a locked gate. We cannot repo it if we cannot get to it. Unless you have a key, I cannot help you. I smiled in the darkness. I do not have a key, I said. But I have something better. I have an invitation. I gave him the address in Buckhead. I told him the gate code which Chantel had foolishly texted me earlier that day for the party preparations. Then I gave him the time. Christmas Eve, 8 o'clock sharp. There is a party, I explained. The gates will be open for the guests. The car will be parked in the circular driveway right out front. He is flaunting it. He wants everyone to see it. He thinks he is untouchable. The repo man whistled low. That is cold lady, giving him up on Christmas Eve. Who is this anyway? An angry ex-wife. I leaned back in my chair watching the city lights flicker outside my window. I am just a concerned citizen who believes in paying debts. I lied smoothly. Just make sure you bring your biggest tow truck. And make sure you are loud. I want everyone to know that Kyle Miller does not pay his bills. You will get your car. The man laughed a dark, gritty sound. You got it. We will be there with bells on. See you at the party. I hung up the phone. The stage was set. The police had the digital evidence of the insurance fraud and attempted murder, which I had already forwarded to my contact in the department. But the police operate quietly. The repo men, however, are loud. They are aggressive. They are public. Kyle wanted to be the center of attention. He wanted to be the big man on campus. Well, on Christmas Eve, all eyes would be on him. And I would be there in the front row to watch him fall. For years I had been conditioned to look for the red clearance stickers. Whenever I walked into a department store, my feet automatically turned toward the back corner where the out-of-season clothes hung limply on overcrowded metal racks. I was the practical sister, the invisible sister, the one who bought sensible gray slacks and beige cardigans because I was just the paper pusher. But as I walked through the glass doors of the high-end mall that afternoon, I walked right past the discount department store. I did not even glance at the sale signs. Today, I was not shopping for clothes. I was shopping for armor. I walked into the most expensive boutique in the wing. The air inside smelled different, like lavender and money. The carpet was so thick my boots sank into it. A sales assistant with perfect makeup and a judgmental stare looked up from her phone. She scanned my jeans and my winter coat, and I saw the dismissal in her eyes. She started to turn away, assuming I was just browsing or lost. But I did not shrink back this time. I walked straight to the center of the showroom. I am looking for a gown, I said, my voice projecting across the quiet room. Something for a formal evening event. The girl gave me a tight smile. The sale section is in the back, madam. I am not looking for a sale, I replied, locking eyes with her. I am looking for something specific. I need red. Not pink, not burgundy. I need blood red. I walked over to a mannequin standing on a pedestal. It was wearing a floor-length silk gown that looked like a flame frozen in time. It was a deep scarlet with a neckline that plunged dangerously low, and a thigh-high slit that screamed confidence. It was the kind of dress that demanded attention. It was the kind of dress Chantel would kill for, but could never pull off because she lacked the spine. I want to try this one, I said, pointing to it. In a size 4. The salesgirl hesitated for a second, surprised by my tone. But she went to the back and returned with the hanger. I stepped into the fitting room and locked the door. As the silk slid over my skin, I watched myself in the three-way mirror. The transformation was instant. The woman staring back at me wasn't the sad little sister with the broken Toyota. She was a warrior. The red fabric hugged every curve, making me look taller, stronger, and dangerous. I looked like a warning sign. I looked like retribution. I stepped out of the fitting room. The salesgirl's jaw dropped slightly. "It fits perfectly," she whispered despite herself. "I will take it," I said. I walked to the counter. The price tag was $1,200. A month ago I would have fainted at that number. But I wasn't poor. That was Kyle's lie. I was a senior risk assessor. I had savings. I had a perfect credit score. I lived below my means while they drowned in debt. I pulled out my heavy metal credit card, the one I paid off in full every single month, and placed it on the glass counter. The machine beeped approved instantly. As the girl wrapped the red dress in layers of white tissue paper, I felt a surge of adrenaline. Chantel had sent out invites for a white Christmas party. She wanted everyone in white to symbolize purity and peace. Well, I was going to walk into that sea of white wearing the color of blood. I was going to stand out like a fresh wound. I took the heavy shopping bag and walked out of the store, my head held high. The war paint was ready. Now all I had to do was show up to the battle. I was sitting on the floor of my living room, surrounded by the physical copies of the evidence, when my phone buzzed against the hardwood. The screen lit up with a FaceTime request from Aunt Bernice. It was late, almost midnight, but I wasn't surprised. Bernice had always possessed a sixth sense when it came to her family. It was like she could feel a storm coming before the first drop of rain even fell. I propped the phone up against a stack of law books and cleared my throat, pushing the stack of incriminating bank statements out of the camera frame before hitting the green button. Her face filled the screen, and for the first time she looked her age. She wasn't wearing her usual armor of heavy makeup and diamonds. She was in a silk robe, her hair wrapped in a scarf, and she looked tired. Her eyes, usually so sharp and commanding, were clouded with worry. "Monique, baby," she said, her voice sounding tinny through the speaker. "I am sorry to call so late. I just could not sleep." I softened my expression. "Why not, Auntie? Is your arthritis bothering you again?" "No, child, it is not my bones. It is my spirit." She pressed a hand to her chest. "My spirit is restless, Monique. I have this heavy feeling right here, like a stone sitting on my heart. I have been praying for an hour, but the feeling won't go away. I just needed to see your face. Are you sure you are okay? Is everything truly all right with you and your sister?" I looked at her kind face on the screen and I felt a pang of guilt. She had been so generous, and they had betrayed her trust so vilely. She could sense the rot in the family tree, even if she couldn't see the specific branch that was breaking. I wanted to tell her everything right then and there. I wanted to scream that Kyle was a thief and Chantel was an accomplice to attempted murder. But I couldn't. Not over the phone. She needed to see the proof. She needed to see their faces when the mask slipped. "I am fine, Auntie," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "In fact, I am better than I have been in a long time. You do not need to worry about me. I am safe." She squinted at the screen, studying my face. "You look different, Monique. You look determined. There is a fire in your eyes I have not seen before. What are you not telling me?" I leaned in closer to the camera and smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. A smile that held a secret. "Auntie, I need you to promise me something. Tomorrow night at the Christmas party. I need you to be in the living room exactly at 8 o'clock. Not a minute later." Bernice frowned. 8 o'clock? Chantel said cocktails start at 7. Why 8? "Because I have prepared something," I said. "A special gift. For you and for the whole family. It is going to clear up all the confusion. It is going to answer every question you have ever had." "A gift?" she asked. "Monique, baby, You know you do not have the money to be buying gifts. You should be saving. I didn't spend a dime, Auntie, I whispered, touching the cool metal of the flash drive sitting on the floor next to me. This gift is priceless. It is the gift of truth. And I think it is going to be the most memorable Christmas present you have ever received. Just promise me, 8 o'clock. She looked at me for a long silence, searching for the frightened little niece she used to know. But that girl was gone. Okay, Monique, she finally said. I trust you. I will be there. I ended the call and sat back in the silence. The unease in her spirit was valid. She sensed a storm was coming. She just didn't realize that I was the hurricane. I was putting the final touches on my makeup when my phone lit up on the vanity table with a bright, intrusive ping. It was a notification from Yvette. The subject line was drowning in snowflake emojis and exclamation points. The Miller Family White Christmas Extravaganza. I clicked open the digital card and it was exactly as pretentious as I expected. It was animated. Little digital snow was falling over a professional photo of Chantel and Kyle posing in white cashmere sweaters, holding hands and looking like a couple from a Hallmark movie. The text below the photo was bold and commanding. Join us for an evening of elegance and purity. Dress code, strictly all white. Let us celebrate the peace of the season together. I laughed out loud, a dry, harsh sound that echoed in my empty bedroom. Purity. Peace. The audacity was breathtaking. My sister, who was currently defrauding our aunt, and my brother-in-law, who had physically cut the brake lines of a car he forced me to drive, were hosting a party about purity. They wanted a whitewash. They wanted everyone to wear the color of innocence to mask the black stain of their crimes. They wanted a visual lie to match the verbal ones they had been telling for months. Chantel was trying to curate a perfect Instagram moment where everyone blended together in a sea of harmless, neutral tones. She wanted a blank canvas where she could paint herself as the benevolent, successful hostess. I turned away from the phone and looked at the bed behind me. Laying there against the gray duvet was the gown I had bought from the boutique. It wasn't white, it wasn't cream, it wasn't ivory or eggshell or any of the safe, compliant tones Chantel demanded. It was red. A deep, violent scarlet red. It was the color of blood, the color of a stop sign, the color of fire. Chantel wanted me to fade into the background. She wanted me to be just another white prop in her perfect winter wonderland. She wanted me to disappear, just like she wanted me to disappear off the road that rainy night. If I wore white, I would be invisible. I would be playing by her rules, accepting her narrative, letting her control the frame. But I was done disappearing. Tonight, I needed to be seen. I needed to be the focal point of the entire room. I walked over to the bed and ran my hand over the silk fabric. It felt cool to the touch, like liquid armor. I imagined walking through those massive double doors. I imagined the sea of white suits and white cocktail dresses, and then me cutting through it like an open wound. I would stand out like a beacon of danger. Everyone would look at me. And if everyone was looking at me, they would be looking at the evidence I was about to present. I picked up the dress and held it against my body in front of the full-length mirror. It clashed violently with the beige walls of my apartment. It was aggressive. It was loud. It was perfect. I looked back at the digital invitation on my phone, where the fake snowflakes were still falling over their fake smiles. I swiped the notification away, deleting it from my screen. Sorry, sister, I whispered to my reflection, my eyes hard and focused. But I do not think I fit your color scheme anymore. White is for surrender. And tonight, I am coming for war. The estate looked like a fortress of ice sitting on top of the hill. Fake snow blew from hidden machines in the shrubbery, coating the manicured hedges in a layer of perfect white powder that shimmered under the landscape lighting. It was beautiful in the way a mausoleum is beautiful, cold, expensive, and completely lifeless. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the party in full swing. It looked like a convention of ghosts. Every single person inside was wearing white. Men in white tuxedos, women in ivory silk gowns holding glasses of clear champagne. It was Chantel's vision of purity brought to life, a perfect sterile world where nothing dirty like poverty or truth was allowed to enter. I took a deep breath and smoothed the fabric of my coat. Underneath it, I was carrying a weapon made of red silk. I walked up the stone steps and nodded to the valet, who looked at my old boots with confusion. I didn't care. I reached the massive double oak doors and waited for the hired doorman to pull them open. When the doors swung wide, the heat of the party hit me first, followed by the sound of a string quartet playing a soft, sanitized version of Jingle Bells. I stepped into the foyer and let the heavy winter coat slide off my shoulders, handing it to the stunned coat check girl. The effect was instantaneous. It was violent. I stepped into the light wearing the blood-red gown. It hugged every curve of my body, and the slit rose dangerously high up my thigh, revealing legs that were no longer shaking with fear. In a room drowning in shades of eggshell and cream, I was a shock to the system. I was a drop of fresh blood falling into a gallon of milk. The conversation in the room didn't just taper off, it was severed. Heads turned, necks craned. The string quartet actually missed a beat. For a solid 10 seconds, there was no sound except the clicking of my heels on the marble floor as I walked toward the center of the room. I could feel their eyes sliding over me. Some were shocked, some were scandalized, but no one could look away. I wasn't the invisible little sister anymore. I was the sun, and they were forced to orbit me. Across the room I saw Chantel. She was holding a glass of white wine and laughing at something a senator's wife was saying. When she saw me, her smile froze. It didn't fade, it just turned into a rictus of horror. Her eyes went wide, scanning my dress from the plunging neckline to the hem. She looked like she was about to scream. She excused herself from the group and practically ran across the room, her white heels clacking frantically. She intercepted me by the ice sculpture of a reindeer. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, but she kept her voice at a forced whisper because half the room was watching us. "What are you doing?" she hissed through her teeth, her eyes bulging. "Can you not read?" The invitation said white. Strictly white. "You look like a whore at a wedding, Monique. You are ruining the aesthetic. Go upstairs and change. I have an old bridesmaid dress in the closet." I looked down at her hand on my arm and then up into her panicked eyes. I didn't pull away. I just smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that she had never seen before. "Oh, I am so sorry, sister," I said, my voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "I must have missed that part of the email. I thought red was festive. It is the color of the season, isn't it?" I gently removed her hand from my arm. Chantel stood there vibrating with rage. She wanted to throw me out. I could see it in her face. She wanted to drag me out by my hair. But she couldn't. Not with the senator watching. Not with the investors looking on. She was trapped by her own desire for perfection. To make a scene would be to admit a crack in her perfect family facade. She had to swallow the poison. Well, she choked out, her face flushing a blotchy pink that clashed with her dress. "Just try to stay in the back. Do not draw attention to yourself." I walked past her, grabbing a glass of red wine from a passing waiter. "I'm afraid it is too late for that, Chantel," I whispered. "The show is just starting." The sound of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal champagne flute cut through the chatter of the party. The room went silent as all eyes turned to the small raised platform at the end of the ballroom. Kyle stood there holding a microphone, looking every inch the successful patriarch in his white tuxedo. The spotlight hit him, and he soaked it up like a lizard basking on a rock. He loved this. He loved the attention, the admiration, and the illusion of power. To the guests, he looked like a titan of industry, but from where I stood in the back of the room, nursing my glass of wine, I saw a desperate man dancing on the edge of a cliff. He cleared his throat and flashed his signature smile, the one that usually charmed investors out of their savings. "Thank you all for coming," he boomed, his voice amplified through the high-end speakers. "Looking around this room tonight, I am reminded of what truly matters. It is not the big deals or the real estate portfolios. It is family. It is the people who stand by you through thick and thin. I almost choked on my drink. This was the man who tried to kill his sister-in-law for an insurance payout, talking about family loyalty. He continued his speech, weaving a tapestry of lies about his charitable donations and his business successes. He painted himself as a self-made man, a pillar of the community. Then he turned his gaze toward the front row, where Aunt Bernice was sitting looking regal in her white fur coat. "And we have a very special guest tonight," Kyle announced, his voice dripping with fake emotion. "The matriarch of our family, Aunt Bernice. Please come up here." Bernice stood up slowly, leaning on her cane, and made her way to the stage. The crowd applauded politely. Kyle reached behind the podium and pulled out a small gift-wrapped box. "Bernice," he said, holding the microphone close to his mouth, "you have given us so much. You have been our rock. And since I know you love fine textiles, I had this commissioned just for you. It is 100% baby alpaca wool, hand-woven by artisans in the Peruvian Andes. It took 6 months to get here, but nothing is too good for you." He handed her the box. Bernice opened it and pulled out a beige scarf. From 10 feet away, I could see the static cling. It wasn't alpaca. It was acrylic. I had seen the exact same scarf in a discount bin at the mall last week for $12. He had stolen $85,000 from her and gave her a piece of scratchy polyester in return. Bernice smiled politely because she had class, but I saw the disappointment in her eyes. She touched the fabric and knew immediately it was cheap, but she nodded and allowed Kyle to kiss her on the cheek. "Oh, Kyle, you shouldn't have," she said, and she meant it. The crowd erupted in applause. They clapped for his generosity. They clapped for his lie. They looked at him like he was a saint. That was the breaking point. The hypocrisy was physically painful. I set my empty wine glass down on a passing waiter's tray. The glass made a sharp clink that sounded like a gavel hitting a block. I smoothed the front of my blood-red dress. It was time. I started walking. I didn't walk around the crowd. I walked through it. The sea of white parted instantly. People stepped back, their eyes widening as the woman in red cut a path straight toward the stage. I didn't look left or right. I kept my eyes locked on Kyle, who was still bowing to the applause. I reached the stairs and took them 2 at a time. The clicking of my heels on the wooden stage echoed through the microphone stand. Kyle turned, his smile faltering as he saw me looming over him. I didn't ask for permission. I reached out and took a second microphone from the stand. The feedback squealed for a second, silencing the room again. I stepped into the spotlight right next to him, and the contrast between his white suit and my red dress looked like a crime scene waiting to happen. The feedback from the microphone shrieked for a split second, cutting through the polite applause like a knife. I stood center stage in my blood-red dress next to Kyle in his pristine white tuxedo. The visual contrast was violent. We looked like a drop of blood on a sheet of snow. Kyle turned to me, his smile tight and strained, his eyes darting to the crowd to see if anyone noticed his panic. He placed a hand on my back, but his fingers dug into my skin with a warning grip. "What do you think you are doing, Monique?" he hissed through his teeth, his voice barely audible over the low hum of the speakers. "Get off this stage right now. You are embarrassing yourself." I ignored him. I turned to the crowd of 200 guests who were staring at us with rapt attention. I raised the microphone to my lips and forced my voice to sound sweet, filled with a trembling admiration that I knew would stroke his massive ego. "That was beautiful, Kyle," I said, my voice booming through the ballroom. "Truly inspiring. Hearing you talk about family and honesty, it really touched my heart." I felt Kyle's grip loosen slightly. He was confused. He expected an outburst. He expected a drunken rant. He did not expect praise. I turned to look him in the eye, making sure my expression was one of pure adoration. "You know, everyone here sees the success." I continued gesturing to the lavish decorations. "They see the house. They see the cars. They see the lifestyle. But they do not know the story behind it. They do not know the sacrifices you made to get here. Kyle straightened his tie, his chest puffed out. He liked where this was going. He loved nothing more than hearing about his own greatness. That is true, Monique, he said into his own mic, letting out a chuckle. It has been a long road, hard work, grit. Exactly, I said, stepping closer to the trap. And because I am so proud of you and Chantel, I wanted to do something special tonight. I know I am just the little sister who does the filing, but I have been working on a project. I put together a short video tribute, a montage of the last few months showing exactly how you built this empire. I pointed to the massive 100-inch projection screen that was rolled up above the stage. I think the investors and Aunt Bernice would love to see the real numbers behind the man, I said, smiling at him. Can we show them, Kyle? Can we show them the truth? Kyle looked at the crowd. They were nodding, smiling, waiting for the show. He looked at the screen and then back at me. He saw a submissive sister trying to buy her way back into his good graces. He saw a chance to have a 5-minute commercial about himself played for a captive audience. His vanity blinded him completely. He turned to the AV technician in the booth at the back of the room and gave a thumbs up. Why not, he announced, spreading his arms wide. Let us roll the tape. I haven't seen it myself, but if Monique made it, I am sure it is revealing. The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The massive screen slowly descended from the ceiling with a mechanical whir. The room went silent in anticipation. Kyle stepped back, giving me the stage, thinking I was about to play a slideshow of his golf trips and ribbon cuttings. I stepped to the side, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure victory. I looked at Aunt Bernice in the front row. I looked at Chantel standing frozen by the ice sculpture. And then I looked at the screen as the projector flickered to life. Enjoy the show, everyone, I whispered into the darkness. The screen went bright white for a second, blinding the room. And then the first image appeared. It wasn't a family photo. It wasn't a business logo. It was a high-resolution scan of a document. And the gasp that went through the room was music to my ears. The massive screen flickered once and then stabilized into a high-definition image that was 10 feet tall. It was not a montage of Kyle receiving an award. It was not a photo of their charity work. It was a document, a Georgia Certificate of Vehicle Title. The font was large enough for people in the back row to read without glasses. The room fell into a confused silence. People squinted, trying to understand why they were looking at paperwork at a Christmas party. But then the details started to sink in. I stood on the stage, holding the microphone loosely in my hand, and turned to look at Aunt Bernice in the front row. I kept my voice soft, almost childlike in its curiosity. Auntie, I am a little confused. You see, I was doing some filing like a good little assistant, and I found this. You told me you sent the money for the Mercedes 3 weeks ago, right? You told us there was a chip shortage and that the car had not arrived yet. I pointed a finger at the screen. The laser pointer effect of my words hit the target. But Auntie, if you look right there at the owner section, it does not say Monique. It says Kyle Miller. And if you look at the date of purchase, it does not say pending. It says August 15th. A ripple of whispers started in the middle of the room and spread outward like a shockwave. I could hear the hushed voices of the investors. August. That is 3 months ago. Why is the car in his name if it was a gift? Wait, did he say there was a supply chain issue? I walked closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at Kyle, who had turned the color of the fake snow outside. He was staring at the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He reached for the remote, but I stepped in front of him, blocking his path. I continued my narration, my voice getting stronger. So I have to ask the question that is on everyone's mind. If Kyle bought the car 3 months ago and registered it in his name, then where is it? Why have I been driving a rusted Toyota with no heater while my car sits in a garage somewhere? Did you know about this, Kyle? Did you forget to tell us that you already bought the car? Or was there another reason you needed the title in your name? The air in the room changed. It went from a festive celebration to a tribunal. The guests were not stupid. They were business people. They knew what embezzlement looked like. They knew what fraud smelled like, and right now the scent of it was coming off Kyle in waves. Aunt Bernice stood up slowly, her hand gripping the back of the chair in front of her. Her eyes were locked on the screen, reading the date over and over again. The lie was unraveling in high resolution, and there was nowhere for Kyle to hide. I did not wait for the murmurs about the stolen title to die down. I pressed the button on the remote again. The screen behind me flickered, and the clean white document vanished. In its place appeared a series of gritty, high-contrast photographs that looked like crime scene evidence because that is exactly what they were. The image was blown up to 10 feet tall, showing the interior of the Toyota steering column. The plastic cover was removed, revealing the hollow, jagged space where the airbag should have been. Stuffed inside that space was a wad of yellowed newspaper. Next to the photo was the mechanic's report signed by Old Joe with the words "vehicle unsafe and airbag missing" circled in thick red marker. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with her hand. The silence that followed wasn't confused anymore. It was horrified. Theft is one thing. White-collar crime is something these people understood. But this was different. This was physical. This was violence. I stepped to the edge of the stage until the toes of my red shoes were hanging over the drop. I scanned the crowd until I found Chantel. She was standing by the ice sculpture, her face as pale as the frozen water next to her. She was shaking her head slightly, mouthing the word no, but I wasn't letting her off the hook. "Take a good look, everyone," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register that carried to the back of the room, without even needing the microphone. "This is the car my sister gave me. She told me it was safe. She told me she checked it herself. She sent me out into the pouring rain on the highway in a metal box that she knew was a coffin." I pointed at the screen without looking back. "That is a newspaper, Chantel. That is what you gave me to cushion my head if I crashed. A sales ad for discount meat. You stole the Mercedes with the 5-star safety rating, and you put me in a car with cut brake lines and paper airbags." I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers across the room. I let the pain and the betrayal bleed into my voice. "Sister," I asked, "my own flesh and blood. You let me drive away in that thing. You watched me leave. You knew if I hit a wall I would never come home. Is that how much you love me? Is my life worth less to you than a down payment on a luxury car? Tell me, Chantel, did you pray I would crash?" Chantel couldn't speak. She looked like she was going to be sick. The guests turned on her, their faces twisting in disgust. The mask of the perfect family had not just slipped, it had shattered into a million sharp pieces on the floor. The visual of the gutted dashboard was damning, but Chantel was not going down without a fight. The silence in the room broke as she let out a shriek of pure panic. She hiked up her white dress and lunged toward the stage, her heels slipping on the polished floor. Her face was twisted into a mask of frantic desperation. She wasn't trying to save her reputation anymore, she was trying to stop a prison sentence. "Turn it off!" she screamed, waving her arms at the AV booth. "Turn it off right now! She is lying. It is all fake." She scrambled up the stairs, reaching for the laptop connected to the projector. Kyle was right behind her, finally snapping out of his shock, ready to physically drag me off the stage. They were closing in on me from both sides, but they were too late. I didn't need the screen for the final blow. I needed the speakers. I looked at Chantel as she reached for the cable. I didn't move to stop her. I just pressed the spacebar on the keyboard. The screen went black, but the audio system kicked in. The volume was set to maximum. A burst of static crackled through the room, followed by the crystal-clear sound of a car engine humming. Then Kyle's voice boomed out, amplified to a terrifying volume. It sounded like God himself was reading the indictment. "Relax, Chantel." The voice on the recording was casual, almost bored. "She won't be driving it for long. I made sure of that this morning before she came outside." I crawled under there and nicked the brake line. Just a tiny cut. Chantel froze mid-step. Her hand hovered over the laptop. Kyle stopped dead in his tracks, his face draining of all color until he looked like a corpse. The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the voice of the man standing on stage confessing to a room full of witnesses. The recording continued merciless and loud. Once that fluid leaks out and she hits the highway, she is going to lose all braking power. She will go right through the windshield, and when she does, we collect. The accidental death rider on that insurance policy is double indemnity. That is $500,000, Chantel. That pays off the shark, it pays off the house. We just have to wait for the phone to ring. The audio ended with a click. The echo of the words "wait for the phone to ring" hung in the air like smoke. It wasn't just a gasp this time. It was a sound of collective horror. People physically recoiled from Kyle as if he were radioactive. He stood there trembling, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. In the front row, Aunt Bernice let out a low, agonizing moan. It was the sound of a heartbreaking. She tried to stand up to confront them, but her legs gave out. She clutched her chest, her fingers digging into the expensive white fur. Her cane clattered to the floor with a loud wooden crack. The guests nearest to her rushed to catch her before she fell, holding her up as she stared at the nephew she had treated like a son. The realization washed over her face. He didn't just steal her money, he tried to kill her blood. The party was over. The execution had begun. The ballroom was deadly silent. The audio recording of Kyle confessing to the crime had finished, but the horror was still hanging in the air, like a poisonous fog. Just as the shock was beginning to turn into outrage, a new sound tore through the room. It was the deafening blast of an air horn. It was not a polite car horn, but the guttural roar of a heavy-duty tow truck. It blasted once, then twice, shaking the glass in the floor-to-ceiling windows. The front doors, which had been closed to keep the winter chill out, were thrown open with a violent crash. A gust of freezing wind swept into the room, blowing napkins off the tables and ruining the perfect temperature. 3 men stepped into the foyer. They were not wearing white tuxedos. They were wearing neon yellow safety vests over grease-stained hoodies. Their arms were covered in tattoos, and they smelled of diesel fuel and cigarettes. They looked like wolves walking into a pen of sheep. The leader of the group, a man with a shaved head and a clipboard, scanned the room with a bored expression. He did not care about the senator. He did not care about the champagne. He just wanted his asset. He spotted Kyle standing on the stage, looking like a ghost. The man marched into the center of the room, his muddy work boots leaving dark streaks on the pristine white marble floor. He stopped at the base of the stairs and looked up at Kyle. "Are you Kyle Miller?" He shouted, his voice rough and commanding. Kyle did not answer. He couldn't. The man did not wait. He looked at his clipboard and then back at Kyle. "Mr. Miller, I am with Quick Cash Recovery. We are here on behalf of the lender. You are 90 days delinquent on the title loan for a 2024 Mercedes-Benz GLE." The words hung there. Title loan. The guests gasped again. Title loans were for desperate people. They were for people who had hit rock bottom. The man held up a set of keys. "We have the spare key. The truck is hooked up. We are repossessing the vehicle immediately. Unless you have $60,000 in cash on you right now, that car is leaving with us." Kyle slumped against the podium. The final layer of his success had been peeled away. He wasn't a tycoon. He was broke, and his car was being dragged away on a hook in front of everyone he ever wanted to impress. The heavy rumble of the tow truck had barely faded when the room was bathed in a new kind of light. Red and blue strobes cut through the festive white decorations, turning the ballroom into a chaotic disco of law enforcement. This time there was no air horn, just the sharp authoritative command of the police department. 4 officers in tactical vests marched through the open doors, pushing past the stunned guests who parted like the Red Sea. They didn't look at the decor. They looked only at the man on the stage. Kyle saw them coming. He took a step back, tripping over the microphone cord. He looked for an exit, but there was nowhere to go. 2 officers vaulted onto the stage. They didn't ask him to come quietly. They spun him around and slammed him against the podium. The sound of metal cuffs ratcheting shut echoed louder than any speech he had given that night. Kyle Miller, the lead officer, shouted, his voice projecting over the murmurs of the crowd, "You are under arrest." Kyle struggled against the grip, sweat pouring down his face. For what he stammered, "I did not do anything. This is a mistake. You are being charged with multiple counts of insurance fraud," the officer continued, relentless and cold, "and conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree against Monique Miller." The words hit Kyle like a physical blow. The reality of a life sentence crashed down on him. And then the rat turned on the ship. He didn't cry for a lawyer. He didn't ask for mercy. He twisted his head around, scanning the crowd frantically until he found his wife. It was her. He screamed, his face purple with rage and fear. It was Chantel. She told me to do it. She wanted the money. She is the beneficiary. Do not take me, take her. She planned the whole thing. He was still screaming accusations, dragging his wife down with him as they hauled him off the stage. The guests watched in horrified silence as the perfect husband threw his partner to the wolves just to save his own skin. The police cars were flashing outside, casting long blue shadows across the ballroom, but inside the real judgment was about to be delivered. Chantel stood alone in the center of the room. Her husband was gone, dragged away in handcuffs. Her reputation was incinerated. She looked around wild-eyed and saw Aunt Bernice sitting in the front row, still clutching her chest. Chantel saw a flicker of hope, a chance to manipulate the one person who had always bailed her out. She rushed forward and threw herself onto her knees, grabbing the hem of Bernice's fur coat. Her white dress was stained with the dirt from the repo man's boots. "Auntie, please," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her perfect makeup. "You have to help me. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Kyle made me do it. I am your family. You cannot let them take everything." Bernice looked down at the sobbing woman at her feet. For years she had looked at Chantel with pride, but now her eyes held nothing but pure, unadulterated disgust. She slowly pulled her coat out of Chantel's grip, as if she were touching something filthy. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. She spoke with a quiet, terrifying finality that silenced the entire room. "I do not have a niece who would kill her own sister for a payout," Bernice said, her voice shaking with suppressed rage. "You are not family. You are a stranger to me, a monster." Chantel sobbed louder, trying to grab her hand again, but Bernice pulled back sharply. And regarding this estate, Bernice continued, looking around the lavish room with a sneer. "You seem to forget that my signature is the only reason the bank approved this loan. I am the guarantor, and I am withdrawing my support effective immediately. I am calling the bank in the morning to surrender the collateral." Chantel looked up, her mouth falling open in shock. "But where will I go?" "I do not care," Bernice said, standing up and leaning on the cane that Monique had rushed to hand her. "You have 24 hours to pack your clothes and get out before they change the locks. Do not take the silver. Do not take the art. Just take your lies and get out of my sight." The rain in this part of the city did not feel like a weather event. It felt like a judgment. It was a cold, stinging drizzle that soaked through the thin fabric of my navy blue polyester jumpsuit. I stood under the cracked plastic roof of the bus shelter, shivering as the wind whipped around the corner. I looked down at my chest. There was no diamond necklace. There was no silk scarf. Just a cheap plastic name tag pinned to the pocket that read, "Citywide Cleaning Services." 3 months ago, I was standing in a ballroom surrounded by the elite, sipping champagne and judging people for wearing the wrong shade of white. Now I was wearing the uniform of the people I used to ignore. The irony was a bitter pill that I had to swallow every single morning. My hands, which used to be manicured weekly, were now red and chapped from the industrial chemicals I used to scrub floors in the office towers downtown. I checked my watch. It was a cheap digital one I bought at a drugstore. The bus was late. Again. I thought about calling Kyle to complain, but then I remembered. Kyle was sitting in a 6x8 cell awaiting trial. He couldn't help me. He couldn't even help himself. The letters he sent me were just pages of rage blaming me for his downfall, so I stopped reading them. I was alone, truly alone. Aunt Bernice had kept her word. The locks on the estate were changed exactly 24 hours after the party. I lost the furniture, I lost the clothes, I lost the status. I tried to call Monique once just to beg for a loan, but the number was disconnected. She had moved on. She had erased me. The city bus finally rounded the corner, its brakes screeching like a dying animal. It splashed dirty puddle water onto my sneakers as it pulled up to the curb. I stepped inside the warm, stale air that smelled of wet wool and exhaust. I dug into my pocket for exact change, counting out the quarters with shaking fingers. I walked to the back of the bus and sat down on the hard plastic seat. I stared out the window at the gray city sliding by. I used to think I was the main character of this story. Now I realized I was just part of the background scenery, invisible and forgotten. The air inside the dealership was cool and smelled of espresso and premium leather. It was a world away from old Joe's greasy garage and the suffocating tension of the white Christmas party. I walked across the polished floor, trailing behind Aunt Bernice, who was moving with a renewed energy. She had traded her cane for a determined stride. She stopped in front of the center display and pointed a manicured finger. It wasn't a pearl-white SUV designed for appearances. It was a G-Wagon. Matte black, boxy, aggressive. It looked less like a car and more like a tank that had been carved out of obsidian. Bernice pulled her checkbook out of her purse. She didn't ask about financing. She didn't ask about monthly payments. She uncapped her pen and wrote a check for the full amount, the sound of the pen scratching against the paper echoing in the quiet room. She tore the check out with a satisfying rip and handed it to the stunned salesman. "Go draw up the papers," she told him, "and put it in her name. Only her name." When the salesman hurried away, Bernice turned to me. She reached out and cupped my cheek with her soft hand. Her eyes were watery, but clear. "Monique," she said softly, "I am so sorry. I let a wolf into the henhouse, and I was too blind to see him eating my family alive. I almost lost you because I wasn't paying attention. I cannot change the past, but I can make sure you are safe in the future." I looked at the massive black vehicle. It had reinforced doors and the highest safety rating in the world. It was a fortress on wheels. It was indestructible, just like I had become. "It is too much, Auntie," I whispered. "It is just enough," she corrected me, wiping a tear from her eye. "Consider it back pay for being the only honest soul in this family. Now here are the keys. Let us go home." The matte black hood of the G-Wagon cut through the heavy afternoon rain like a shark moving through dark water. Inside the cabin, the world was silent and temperature-controlled. The smell of fresh Italian leather filled my nose, a stark contrast to the mildew and fear that used to cling to my old Toyota. I gripped the thick, heated steering wheel, feeling the vibrations of the massive engine beneath my hands. This wasn't just a car, it was a fortress. It was a statement that I was no longer the prey. I was the one deciding where the road went. I turned onto the familiar street that led toward the downtown district. The wipers swept across the glass in a rhythmic, hypnotic beat. Through the blur of the downpour, I saw a figure standing at the bus stop ahead. The shelter was cracked and offered little protection against the driving wind. The person was huddled against the plastic wall, wearing a shapeless navy blue uniform that was soaked through to the skin. As I got closer, the figure turned. Even through the rain and the months of hardship, I recognized the face instantly. It was Chantel. She looked older. The stress of poverty had etched lines into her face that no expensive cream could hide anymore. Her hair, which used to be her crowning glory, was frizzy and pulled back into a messy knot. She was shivering, clutching her arms to her chest as she waited for a bus that was running late. I slowed the car down just a fraction. The massive tires crunched over the wet asphalt. The sound made Chantel look up, her eyes locked onto the aggressive black grille of the SUV. Then she saw me through the driver's side window. Time seemed to freeze for a second. I saw a spark of recognition flare in her eyes, followed immediately by a look of desperate hope. She took a step toward the curb, moving away from the safety of the shelter and into the rain. Her mouth opened. I could see her shouting my name, though the sound was swallowed by the storm and the insulation of my car. She raised a hand, half waving, half begging. In her mind, she was already playing out the scene. She thought I would pull over. She thought I would unlock the doors and let her into the warmth. She thought I would drive her to a hot meal and hand her some cash, because that is what the old Monique would have done. She was banking on the fact that we shared the same blood. But she forgot that she was the one who tried to spill mine. I looked at her wet, miserable face and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, no sadness. It was like looking at a stranger. I thought about the brake lines she let Kyle cut. I thought about the hollow dashboard. I thought about the insurance policy. If she had her way, I wouldn't be driving this car. I would be in a grave, and she would be spending my death benefit on a vacation. Forgiveness is a virtue, people say. But in the real world, forgiveness without change is just permission to be hurt again. And forgiving the person who plotted your murder is not kindness, it is suicide. I didn't touch the brake pedal. Instead, I reached up and slid my dark sunglasses onto my face, hiding my eyes from her view. I became a monolith, a force of nature that could not be bargained with. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The twin-turbo engine roared to life, a deep guttural growl that shook the pavement. I saw Chantel's face crumble as she realized I wasn't stopping. The hope died instantly, replaced by the crushing weight of her new reality. I sped past her, the G-Wagon kicking up a massive spray of dirty rainwater that soaked her legs. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to see her standing there alone in the cold. That was her life now. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, driving straight into a future that was finally mine. Family is not defined by DNA, but by loyalty and behavior. Monique's journey proves that the most dangerous enemies often hide in plain sight, disguised as those who are supposed to protect us. We must learn that silence is not weakness. It is often the sound of a strategy being built. Forgiveness without change is merely self-destruction, and staying in toxic environments can literally cost you your life. The bravest thing you can do is stop fighting for people who are betting on your downfall. Walk away from tables where respect is no longer served and drive toward a future where you are finally in control. Stop looking in the rearview mirror at people who don't deserve to be part of your future. If you are ready to take the wheel and drive toward your own blessings, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, would you have stopped the car for your sister or would you have kept driving? Let me know.